Order, order. Good morning, everyone. Paula Barker to move the motion.
Thank you, Dr Morrison. And can I just place on record that I am the co-chair of the Ending Homelessness APPG. Dr Morrison, while it's always an honour to speak in a debate under your stewardship, I deeply regret that we have to have this debate today. Government policy is clear. The letter of the law is clear. Basic decency is clear. No child should have to sleep rough on the streets of this country. Despite this, last week I found myself watching a stark ITV News report by Dan Hewitt from ITV that revealed that the homelessness charity crisis is seeing growing numbers of families with children that are homeless and approaching them for help after being turned away by their councils, and in some cases this has forced those families and children to sleep rough. Over a period of 6 months, Crisis has identified 134 cases of families with children and pregnant mothers who came to their services asking for help to avoid or end their homelessness because they had been unable to access support by their local authority. 134 cases. That's about 4 a week, or almost 1 every single working day. These cases included children as young as 4, a child with epilepsy, refugees we have welcomed, single mothers, all people who needed help and were utterly failed by our broken system. In my time as Shadow Minister for Homelessness and Rough Sleeping, and as a continued advocate since, I have heard many heartbreaking stories in my time campaigning in this space. I have seen relentless record highs in the numbers of people forced to sleep rough. People discharged from hospital to recover on the streets, children doing their homework in mouldy B&Bs. I thought I could no longer be shocked by how deep this crack in the foundation of our society runs, but I was wrong. Hearing about children being forced to sleep rough while the services that were built to help them played past the parcel with their future was profoundly shocking. Because before we talk about national plans, funding pots and statutory duties, I want everyone in this chamber today to sit with these thoughts. What if it were me? What if that was my child? Your child having nowhere in the world to go, sleeping in a car, sleeping on the steps of a town hall, confused, getting colder, hungrier and more scared every night. How did it come to this? How is our system so broken that we cannot even keep children from having to sleep rough? Dr Morrison, we can end this scandal and deliver historic change if we hold on to the moral clarity that we feel right now and pull every lever we have, and we still have many levers we can pull, if we have the political will to prioritise this issue. And I'm deeply grateful to the Minister because she has already written to every council in the country reminding them of their duties, their clear duties, under Section 17 of the Children Act 1989 and under the Housing Act 1996. But will the Minister set out what accountability measures will be put in place to ensure situations like this are unheard of, as they should be? These cases also show how guidance, laws and letters can only take us so far. I do not believe that anyone goes to work wanting to refuse help to a child facing rough sleeping. But the fact is that it is happening, and it shows just how broken our system really is, and how critical it is that we reduce the number of people and families being pushed into homelessness. I welcome the Government's national plan to end homelessness for being an historic first in tackling a range of forms of homelessness across England, setting out a new duty to collaborate between 6 key departments, outcomes frameworks for local authorities and matching our APPG's call for the collation of homelessness funding into a multi-annual pot, I should have said. However, when the APPG on ending homelessness, which I co-chair, produced our Home Support Prevention Report, we listened closely to the homelessness sector, researchers, councils and experts by experience to identify 3 key pillars that the government needed to address. The National Plan only really addresses 1.5 of those pillars, and without delivering on all 3, some of which I accept are beyond even the Minister's capable reach, families will keep being forced into desperate situations. The plan broadly focused on what we called the support pillar, with toolkits and supplying an outcomes framework for local authorities that will be published in due course, as well as the prevention pillar through the new duty to collaborate. I would welcome any further information the Minister can provide on the timeline for the consultations on the toolkit and the new duty. However, reviewing the prevention targets becomes clear that a key driver of homelessness is not being adequately addressed. That is Home Office policy. Homelessness after move on from asylum accommodation rose 37% according to the last crisis homelessness monitor for England. Yet the only target the Home Office has signed up to is informing councils when people are leaving its accommodation. The Home Office has effectively been let off the hook when it comes to preventing homelessness amongst refugees. People we have welcomed here and instead has been allowed to start doing what other departments have been expected to do for years under the duty to refer. This is a huge hole in the preventative wall the Minister is working to construct, one that will see homelessness and further division spreading across the country if it's not closed. And I'd like to talk about homes. Homes are the best and only truly sustainable way to end and prevent people's homelessness. Yet across the country, an affordable home is becoming a pipe dream for whole communities, leading directly to unsustainable numbers of people needing homelessness support. It does not matter how quickly or effectively we bail if the boat is sinking. Therefore, it's vital that the government steps up its social house building targets until the crucial 90,000 social homes per year supported across the homelessness sector has been reached. One way this could be done is by stepping up work on empty homes. Analysis by Crisis found that just £1.38 billion direct government investment in local authorities and partner agencies could bring 40,000 long-term empty homes back into use as social homes over 4 years. And while I appreciate this is not the Minister's brief directly, how is the Minister working to ensure that the Housing Minister understands the needs for homes for people experiencing homelessness? We also need to look at short-term measures. A review of social homes allocations policy is welcome, but there needs to be a commitment to legislative change. The feedback I received from the 27 organisations in our APPG steering group was that people experiencing homelessness face a range of barriers to accessing social homes beyond simply supply, including being dubbed too poor to afford social rent homes. How far have we come from the purpose of social housing, as housing to ensure everyone can afford a home, if people across Britain are being deemed too poor for it? Where are they meant to go? Supported housing, temporary accommodation, the streets, back into the bowels of the system. Therefore, I would welcome the Minister in her reply setting out a timeline for her review of social homes allocation policy. And given the lack of social homes, the affordability of the private rented sector is crucial. For people who rely on benefits to pay their rent, the Chancellor's announcement in the budget in November that the 2-child benefit limit will be abolished was extremely good news. However, as it stands, many families in my constituency of Liverpool Wavertree and across the country are still struggling. There is an average gap of £200 per month between local housing allowance and the median rent for a home. That gap can turn a bump in the road to a car crash. If people lose their job, need to take up caring responsibilities or fall ill, they can no longer afford to pay their rent. When they are pushed into homelessness, the local council simply cannot find a local home they can afford, trapping them in temporary accommodation at much greater expense to the state. A classic false economy. I know the Minister understands these issues. At a recent meeting of the APPG for Ending Homelessness, I was struck by her focus on the structural causes of homelessness rather than individuals. A welcome step forward from the last government. My concern is whether that understanding is shared across other government departments. Do the DWP and Treasury know how hard it is for families on universal credit to keep a roof over their heads when fewer than 3 in every 100 homes are affordable on local housing allowance, and that the LHA freeze is pushing people into homelessness? And does the Home Office care that when it slashed the move-on period from asylum accommodation from 56 to 28 days, it was making it impossible for families who have been granted asylum to find a home in that time, and pushing people into homelessness? I would welcome the Minister setting out how often the Interministerial Group for Homelessness and Rough Sleeping will meet, if she will commit to publishing the minutes, and what steps will be taken if departments in that group do not deliver on their stated commitments. We must not let national government play the same game of pass the parcel as we have seen in local government, when children's lives are hanging in the balance. I know that determination is shared by this Minister, and I hope it is shared by government as a whole. Thank you.
The question is if this House has considered the matter of rough sleeping among families with children. I intend to call the front bench at 10:28, so brevity will be a virtue. Call Jim Shannon.
Mr Chairman, first of all, can I say what a pleasure it is to serve under your chairship, and can I thank the Honourable Lady for Liverpool Wavertree for leading the debate. The Honourable Lady often brings debates of importance, especially on issues like this, and I welcome her contribution today. She obviously shows the compassion, the understanding from her own constituency, and expresses that incredibly well. Thank you very much. Also pleased to see the Minister in her place again. She's becoming a frequent visitor in the last 2 days to Westminster Hall, but it's always a pleasure to see the Honourable Lady in her place, and also the Shadow Minister as well. I wish him well. I'd seen on social media the awful revelations that there had been incidents in England of children as young as 3-year-old, my goodness, holding on to their mummies, or being forced to sleep rough with their families, and what an awful thing to have to think about, and even to experience. Even at that young age, you may not understand exactly all that's happening. She is right, the Honourable Lady is right, to raise this issue, and it must be our duty to ensure that no child, and furthermore, no individual, is ever subject to sleeping rough with little or no support. The Honourable Lady's revelations and personal experience conveys that very well through her words today. This should not be allowed to happen. There are many charities in Northern Ireland, of course, who contribute and do well, and across this great United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, of course. But I want to, if I can, just also, in my own constituency of Strangford, thank all of the church groups who collectively and ecumenically come together to ensure that they help families in need at the time that they need it. It's often underestimated, the goodwill and the Christian faith that drives people and churches to do that, but I thank them for that as well. The Simon community are very active in Northern Ireland. I want to give one example. I'm going to use their stats for Northern Ireland and give some examples, and I used their information as some of the evidence. They have revealed that in specific audits across Northern Ireland, the number of people observed sleeping rough has ranged from 0 to 19 per night. It depends very much on what the circumstances are, with an average of 6 in certain monitored areas. In Northern Ireland, rough sleeping among families with children, to be fair, Mr Chairman, is relatively uncommon, because families are usually placed quickly into temporary accommodation, and I know that's whenever the rush comes for the circumstances overtaken, whether they have to leave their house or whatever the reason, or domestic abuse could be one of the reasons for it happening. The authorities in Northern Ireland quickly jump in to give the temporary accommodation. So I think, to be fair, in Northern Ireland, it's not something that we see much of, because of the methodology that the authorities in Northern Ireland reply to ensure that it happens. My request, of course, to the Minister will be ever mindful that's a devolved matter for us, but I think there's some things we can learn together. Maybe that's an example of what we do. Maybe things are different in Northern Ireland, and maybe the temporary accommodation is maybe a bit more abundant perhaps, and maybe the way we do it seems to work. So just again to be helpful in this conversation today. As of November 2024, some 5,000, almost 400 children were living in temporary accommodation in Northern Ireland. I think that's the other side of the coin. It illustrates very clearly that there is much need. It's often under the homeless strategy and category as well, as properties are not permanent places of residence and are often, with respect, substandard and may not always be up to the standard they should be. These figures are only increasing and showing there's a real issue here, and steps are not being taken to address it. So I want to talk briefly about the loss of housing and domestic abuse, Mr. Chairman. Loss of housing and domestic abuse are significant drivers of homelessness. Victims of domestic abuse may be forced to leave their homes suddenly to protect themselves, protect their children, often without time to secure alternative accommodation. And with the shocking stats in Northern Ireland in relation to domestic abuse and violence against women, I want to reiterate how important it is that we make those services available and known, and continue to ensure they are fit for purpose to provide support for those who need it most. To conclude, Mr. Chairman, working on the presumption at my speech will be about 5 minutes, make sure everybody else gets in. In conclusion, while families with children sleeping rough are often hidden from official stats, the reality is stark. It is real. In England alone, over 140,000 children are living in temporary accommodation, and this is not a problem confined to one region. It affects communities in Scotland and in Wales, in England and Northern Ireland alike, where the things don't stop at the Irish Sea, don't stop at the borders. We must do more on a UK-wide basis to prevent families reaching crisis point, to expand access to safe and affordable housing. I congratulate the government on removing the two-child benefit cap. That made sure that some almost 60,000 children in Northern Ireland from 13,000 families were lifted out of poverty. I put it on record in the Chamber, I've said that, I said again in this Chamber, and some of the work that the government's doing is to be welcomed and encouraged. But we need to ensure that every child has a secure home, and I look for the Minister for her commitment to do just that. Thanks so much.
It's a pleasure to serve under your leadership. I thank my honourable friend, the member for Liverpool Wavertree, for securing this debate and for her tireless work on tackling homelessness. The crippling cost of living, sky-high private rents and lack of social housing in the UK mean that far too many people have no other option than to spend the night on the street. We hear reports of people sleeping in cars, pregnant women being turned away from support by their local councils, and children as young as 4 years old being forced to sleep rough. In the 6th richest country in the world, these are despicable reminders of how broken our system is. And we know the detrimental effect that sleeping rough and housing insecurity can have on children's health, education and life chances. The trauma of living in insecure, temporary and often dangerous conditions can have lifelong impacts on physical and mental health, housing stability and economic prospects. Children experiencing homelessness face increased rates of infection, asthma and sleep deprivation, high rates of anxiety, depression and behavioural issues, and a higher likelihood of being exposed to violence, crime and the risk of sexual assault. The streets are no place for children to be sleeping. This has a knock-on effect across other areas of children's lives: disrupted education, increased school dropout rates, and children being forced to hide their situation, leading to social exclusion. We must do better. A huge driver of homelessness and rough sleeping is the current unaffordability of the private rented sector. 2 weeks ago, the Welsh Affairs Select Committee heard evidence from Shelter Cymru, Cymorth, the Bevan Foundation and Crisis. Private rents in Wales are increasing faster than anywhere else in Great Britain. In the last year, private rents in Wales have gone up by 6% on average. In England and Scotland, the figure is closer to 3%. Well, housing is devolved in Wales, but there are levers that can be pulled in Westminster, particularly around benefits, to prevent more people from being forced into homelessness immediately. The most effective would be the unfreezing of local housing allowance and restoring it to cover the true cost of rent. Local housing allowance is not just a massive driver of homelessness in general, but of keeping people in homelessness, in turn affecting those sleeping rough, including children. When introduced by Labour in 2008, it was intended to cover private rents up to the 50th percentile, that is the lowest 50% of rents in a local area. Due to subsequent policy changes and freezes, LHA now covers only 1% of private rents in Wales and 2.5% in England. I call on this government to end the routine freezing of LHA and permanently relink it to the 50th percentile of local private rents, in line with the Welsh Government's position. This is a vital step to prevent homelessness, tackle inequality and further rebalance the power of private tenants. How can the government achieve its plan to halve long-term rough sleeping and prevent homelessness if people on low incomes simply cannot afford a local home? We must ensure that no child is forced to sleep rough in any circumstances. And this... I will, of course.
I was shocked, but perhaps not entirely surprised to learn that Somerset ranks third in the country for the number of young people sleeping rough, in absolute terms across the local authorities. What struck me even more was that it sits sandwiched between what are otherwise all urban areas. So does the Honourable Member agree with me that the challenges of destitution and homelessness with families are as acute but far less visible, and that this leads to rural rough sleeping often being overlooked in national policy considerations?
Can I thank the Honourable Lady for her intervention? And we both represent very rural, parts of England and parts of Wales, and I think that is an extremely valid point that the Honourable Lady has made. Rural areas do often get overlooked, and there's simply less housing as well in rural areas, so it's a double whammy. So that was a really welcome intervention, and I thank the Honourable Lady for that. We must ensure that no child is forced to sleep rough in any circumstances, and measures that I've outlined in my speech today would be a vital step towards achieving that. Diolch yn fawr.
It's a pleasure to serve with you in the chair. I would like to begin by thanking my honourable friend, the member for Liverpool Wavertree, for securing this important debate. As we've heard, and I will maybe repeat a couple of the points and add to the debate, the fact that in one of the wealthiest countries on earth, families with children are still being pushed into homelessness and in some cases onto the streets in a reality that is not an unfortunate inevitability but a national disgrace. We are a country with immense resources and capacity to solve problems, a country that spends tens of billions of pounds on weapons every year and that has just managed to open the Crossrail Elizabeth line, one of Europe's largest construction projects. Yet we cannot guarantee that every child in this country has a safe and secure roof over their head when they go to sleep at night. That contradiction is a fundamentally moral one, and it should weigh heavily on all of us as parliamentarians with a collective power to change that status quo. The statistics alone paint a bleak picture. In autumn of 2025, an estimated 4,793 people were sleeping rough on a single night in England, a record high and a 171% increase since 2010. And we must remember that this figure, as a snapshot of just one night, is widely acknowledged to undercount. Recent reports have even more shockingly suggested that families with young children are being forced to sleep rough after being refused emergency local authority accommodation, despite this being in direct contravention of the law. As we know, children in temporary accommodation are still classed as homeless. According to numbers, there are over 175,000 children that are currently homeless in temporary accommodation. Based on the most recent council-level data as of June 2025, over 600 children were living in temporary accommodation in Kirklees, where my constituency of Dewsbury and Batley sit. These children form part of around 375 family households in Kirklees in temporary accommodation as of March 2025. And this temporary accommodation, Minister, is costing Kirklees between £7 to £8 million. That money could be better spent providing other public services. So in families that are reaching, so recent reports have had more shockingly suggested that families with young children are being forced to sleep rough after being refused emergency local authority accommodation, despite this being in direct contravention of the law. If families are reaching the point where they are unable to prevent their children from sleeping on the streets or in cars or in anywhere else not designed for human habitation, then something in the system is clearly broken and the state failing in its most basic obligations to its citizens. I have a constituent who's been contacting me regularly over the last several weeks. She is a single mother with 3 children. One of her child has autism and asthma, and she has not, the council have been unable to provide suitable accommodation for her and her children, and she's been sleeping in her car for the last several weeks. Her car is now uninhabitable. It's been written off, and she's being forced to accept temporary bed and breakfast accommodation, which is not suitable for her children, but she has nowhere else to go. I'm sure Kirklees are doing everything they can to help this family, but with the lack of resources and the lack of adequate family social housing, these examples are not as rare as they should be.
Will my honourable friend give way?
I will give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and he's right to highlight the resources and the challenges that local authorities have. In my constituency of Chichester, the outward perspective would be that it's actually a very affluent area and we probably have less levels of homelessness, but in 1989 a gentleman died on our streets, and so a charity was formed called Stone Pillow. Stone Pillow has now gone on to support thousands of people that are experiencing homelessness across the Chichester and Bognor area. Does he agree with me that in situations where local authorities are too poorly funded to support people, that's where the charitable and the voluntary sector have stepped in admirably, but they shouldn't have to do that?
I thank my honourable friend for her intervention, and she's absolutely right. We all pay tribute to all the charities, the one in her constituency and across the country, that are stepping in to help people in desperate times of need, where government and councils have not been able to provide the necessary support. And I pay tribute to all those charities, but they shouldn't have to be, we shouldn't have charities stepping in to provide basic necessities for children and families in our country. So if part of the failure lies undoubtedly in the immense financial pressures facing local authorities, councils across the country are struggling to meet their duties to house those at risk of homelessness, including children, because of skyrocketing costs, limiting housing supply and shockingly overstretched budgets. The cost of temporary accommodation alone has placed extraordinary financial strain on local government, with councils now covering more than half of these costs themselves, according to recent analysis by the Institute for Government. I see the consequences of this crisis firsthand in my own constituency. Another example, housing and homelessness are among the most frequent issues raised by my constituents. My office regularly hears from families who are on the brink of losing their homes, people facing unfair evictions, struggling with rising rents, or desperately seeking emergency accommodation at a time of unimaginable crises. Increasingly, what we are seeing is that these are not isolated individuals, but families with children who are living with the constant fear of having nowhere to go. Local authorities want to help, but they are operating with limited resources in the face of overwhelming demand. Another particular shocking incident reported in local media at the start of this year. A single mum of 3, including a 12-year-old daughter with cancer, has been housed by my local authority in a one-bed flat with damp and mould for the past 2 years after a no-fault eviction by a private landlord who wanted to sell the property. It is stories like these that mean we must be honest about the scale of the challenge facing us and the requisite ambition to adequately address it. So I would like to ask the Minister a number of questions. First, what steps is the government taking to ensure that no local authority unlawfully refuses emergency accommodation to families with children, and how will compliance with these statutory duties be monitored? Second, what additional financial support will be provided to councils that are struggling with the costs of temporary accommodation? And finally, what specific measures within the government's homelessness strategy are targeted at preventing families with children from ever reaching the point of rough sleeping in the first place? Because ultimately this debate is about the kind of country we want to be. A society that allows children to sleep on the streets is a society that has lost sight of its most basic humanity. Ending rough sleeping among families is not simply a policy challenge, it is a moral imperative, and it is one that this Parliament must treat with the urgency it deserves. Thank you.
Thank you, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, Dr Morrison, this morning, and can I congratulate my honourable friend on securing this debate on such an important issue. The levels of homelessness in our United Kingdom are appalling, and for a wealthy country like ours, it's shameful that it's allowed to persist to this extent. In Scotland today, the scale of homelessness and rough sleeping is stark. Under the watch of the SNP government, homelessness has spiralled. The number of open homelessness cases has risen by 58% since the SNP came to power in 2007. Devastatingly, someone in Scotland becomes homeless every 15 minutes, and a record 10,480 children are currently living in unsuitable temporary accommodation as of September last year. This is a disgrace. Last year, over 4,500 children were living in poverty in my Western Bartonshire constituency, putting them in a position of uncertainty, fear and uncomfortable surroundings, hungry, cold and often unsafe. This instability takes a toll on children's mental and physical health, their education and sense of security. It's an unthinkable situation for most of us, but a horrific everyday reality for many homeless people with children in my constituency and across the UK. The consequences can be tragic. New figures released last week show that 231 people died in Scotland whilst experiencing homelessness in 2024. These deaths should be a wake-up call to the Scottish Government and to every government. At the root of this crisis is a shortage of housing. House building in Scotland has fallen dramatically. In fact, 5,000 fewer homes are being built every year compared with the years of the last Labour-led Scottish Government. Had this rate been maintained at the same rate under the SNP as under Scottish Labour, there would be 90,000 more homes built in the last 19 years. Imagine how many more families could have avoided homelessness if those homes existed. Western Bartonshire has one of the most severe housing crises in Scotland, where I frequently see children starting life on the back foot through no fault of their own. We must start building more houses. No one, no matter their personal situation, should be sleeping rough, especially those with children. How will anyone living in the streets improve their circumstances if they're not given the opportunity to rebuild their lives? Under the leadership of Anna Sawa, Scottish Labour has set a plan to deliver 125,000 new homes over 5 years across all tenures, expanding affordable housing, reforming planning laws and establishing a housing investment bank to unlock land and finance construction. But we must also give councils the resources they need to meet their legal duties. The Scottish Government must intervene earlier to prevent families from becoming homeless in the first place. Every child deserves the stability of a safe home and a decent start to life. Rough sleeping amongst families with children is not just a housing issue, but very much a moral one. No child in Western Bartonshire, Scotland or anywhere else in our United Kingdom should ever have to wonder where they will sleep tonight. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Dr Wilson, and it's wonderful to speak under your chairmanship. Rough sleeping amongst families and children is one of the starkest signs of a system failing at a point where people need it the most. No child should ever be exposed to that kind of trauma. No parent should ever be in the position of trying to protect their child or having no safe or stable place to go. Now, this issue matters very deeply to me personally. When I was 15, my own family experienced homelessness. I want to be clear, though, we never had to sleep rough. We always had some form of roof over our heads. But even without that, the disruption, the insecurity, the fear, it just leaves an everlasting mark. You feel lost, you feel hurt, and I can tell you're absolutely scarred for life. But I know with someone showing love and someone showing care, there is hope and there is light. And I do genuinely believe that with this minister, she's given the government the bulb. The government just needs to switch that light on. When home is uncertain, everything else becomes uncertain too. School suffers, mental health suffers, family life is placed under an enormous strain. That is why I feel so strongly that when we talk about rough sleeping among families, we cannot treat it as only a question of emergency accommodation. We have to see it for what it is, a crisis that can shape a child's life forevermore, long after the immediate dangers have passed. So for families with children, the answer must be some sort of housing first approach. Put simply, we need to start from the principle that a safe, secure home is not the reward at the end of recovery, it's a foundation that makes recovery possible. If a family is facing rough sleeping or is at immediate risk of it, the first job must be to get them into stable accommodation quickly, not leave them cycling through unsuitable temporary accommodation and arrangements, not expect children to recover while living out of bags in one room, and not assume that crisis ends at the moment a roof is found. Not seeing a mum with a baby having to leave them during the night to warm their milk in a microwave in a service station, like one in my constituency. And I'm working with families in Doncaster East and Isle of Axholme who have been made homeless and are living in those kind of hotels. Now, they're no longer sleeping rough, but they are living in deeply unsuitable, unstable circumstances. Of course, the priority must be to get families off the streets and to a safe place. But their story does not end there, and neither can our concern. That is the point where they need us the most, and need the support the most, to end the disruption and get back on track. Because alongside housing, there must be proper wraparound support. That means mental health support, help with school continuity, support into work, help with debt, access to children's services where needed, and practical help for parents trying to rebuild stability post-trauma. Without that, we risk addressing the symptom for a night while leaving the damaged untouched for years. A child who experiences homelessness or rough sleeping does not simply bounce back because the immediate risk has passed. The disruption and the impact, as I said, is long-term, and the response has to be long-term too. If we're serious about ending rough sleeping among families with children, we need to be serious about stability and support. At home first, then the sustained, joined-up help to build lives. So I urge the government, build the social homes, support those with trauma, deliver the toolkit, work across departments to deliver our homelessness strategy. And I can tell you now that that 15-year-old doing his GCSE homework, his coursework, on the double mattress sat next to his mum and sister in that room, I can tell you that it's been a journey, but now he's fast approaching 50. I'm proud to be part of a government that can once and for all end that for children going forwards.
Alaba.
Thank you. I'm pleased to serve under your chairmanship, Dr Morrison, and I thank my honourable friend, the member for Liverpool and Wavertree, for securing this debate. I also thank my friend and colleague for his very impassioned sharing very deep sort of personal experiences. And what I would also say is he doesn't look a day over 60. The fact that there are children sleeping rough on the streets of the United Kingdom should appall every member of Parliament. I certainly find it deeply distressing. The impact that homelessness of any form, including rough sleeping, has on the futures of young people is huge, and the numbers of those impacted are steadily increasing. As we speak, around 176,000 children are believed to be homeless and living in temporary accommodation, the highest amount since records began. That figure is nearly equivalent to the total number of children living in Leeds. In the first 6 months of 2025 alone, the homelessness charity Crisis saw more than 100 pregnant women and families with children use its services after being turned away from support offered by their local councils. Councils which are also struggling to cope with the rising pressures of the housing crisis, we are working hard to fix. This government, with its comprehensive national plan to end homelessness and ambition to build 1.5 million homes, has been clear that there is no excuse for children to be sleeping rough on our streets. On this note, I was pleased to see the Homelessness Minister write to the councils to reiterate their duty of care to prevent children from sleeping rough. It is also important to recognise the vital role that the first sector plays when it comes to safeguarding young people from the impacts of homelessness and rough sleeping. In Southend, for example, we are fortunate to have HARP, a dedicated homelessness charity working around the clock to safeguard our city's most vulnerable residents. Vanessa Hemmings, who I've had the pleasure of meeting on a number of occasions, and her dedicated team at HARP works tirelessly with passion and empathy to ensure that even in the most challenging of environments and moments, our residents have somewhere to turn. Since becoming the MP for South and East and Rochford, I have been grateful for the chance to visit HARP on several occasions and have been consistently moved by the invaluable work that they do. This debate is a crucial one, and I strongly hope it will refocus the efforts to ensure that no child has to endure a night without a home. Thank you.
It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, Dr Morrison, and I'm so grateful to my honourable friend, the member for Liverpool Wavertree, for securing this really important debate. Now, at the heart of this debate is a very simple principle. Every single child deserves a safe, warm roof over their head. And that shouldn't be controversial for anyone. It should be the basic foundation of a decent society. Before coming to this place, I spent 18 years working for the YMCA in North Staffordshire, supporting people facing homelessness and housing insecurity. So I've seen up close the reality of what homelessness does to people. And when kids are then caught up in the mix of that instability, the consequences can really last a lifetime, as we heard before. A secure home provides more than shelter. It offers stability, dignity, and the foundation for a child to thrive. But having a roof over your head is only the very first step, as we heard earlier. Across many communities, including my own in Stoke-on-Trent and Kidsgrove, there are families who receive the keys to a home, but step inside to find an empty property. No beds for the kids, no sofa to sit on, no table to eat around. Now that's the reality of furniture poverty, and it's far more widespread than many people realise. That's why last week I brought together partners in Stoke-on-Trent, including Stoke-on-Trent City Council, Newcastle-under-Lyme Borough Council and local housing providers, alongside the charity End Furniture Poverty, which is doing excellent work across the country to tackle this matter. Now, End Furniture Poverty, and I know the honourable member who's brought this debate today has worked extremely closely with them for a number of years. They are campaigning to increase the percentage of social housing that's offered on a furnished tenancy basis. So I would be keen to hear the Minister's considerations about what they're campaigning for, about increasing the supply of furnished tenancies amongst social housing providers. Because when a family finally gets the keys to their home, it should be a really great moment, shouldn't it? They also need to live there with dignity. But there is a fundamental issue that we must confront, and that is, as we've heard today, we simply do not have enough affordable social council homes. In Stoke-on-Trent alone, I know that we've got more than 3,500 people on the council's housing waiting list. And when you don't include association lists, the real demand is even greater. Too many people are locked out of home ownership, and without sufficient social and affordable housing, families remain trapped in temporary accommodation or insecure housing. So if we're serious about ending homelessness, especially for families with kids, then we must keep building high-quality, genuinely affordable homes, social homes, that the communities we all represent desperately need. Because ultimately, this is about something really simple. Every single child deserves not only a roof over their head, but a place that they can truly call home. Thank you.
Hear, hear.
It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, Dr Milson, and I want to thank the Honourable Member for Liverpool Wavertree for securing this important debate. In my constituency of Woking, we are fortunate to host the extraordinary work of the York Road Project. For 3 decades, this local charity has supported people experiencing homelessness. It began as a winter night shelter run by local volunteers who simply believed that no one should be left out in the cold. Yet today, it's a significant local charity that provides specialist help for people who are experiencing homelessness. They keep people off the street at night in their night shelter and support them to turn their lives around in their day centre. It is an unfortunate truth that rough sleeping and homelessness is growing. More people are in crisis, and increasingly, this involves families with children. Local authorities are spending more than ever on temporary accommodation to try to do their best to keep people off the streets, but particularly those with families and children. The net costs to council has risen from 200 million in 2015 to more than 1.3 billion today. At the same time, the councils are facing a wider funding gap, estimated to be 4 billion. This is a postcode lottery where some constituencies and councils are hugely struggling. The system, as a result, is under huge strain, where temporary accommodation is becoming long-term accommodation and housing for families who are stuck in limbo. And we see from our casework the human impact of this every day. I do need to highlight the quality of that temporary accommodation as well is a huge issue. Although it is vital we keep families with children off the streets and have a roof over their head, the fact that the Housing, Communities and Local Government Select Committee's report into temporary accommodation and impact on children made for such stark reading should shock us all. That report found that 74 children have died in the last 5 years because of the quality of temporary accommodation they've been in. 58 of them were under 1. This is 21st century Britain. That is not acceptable. I do want to use my time to highlight a deeply worrying case in my constituency of Woking. The Conservatives, running Surrey County Council, have withdrawn funding for an initiative that supported single mothers with their children in temporary supported accommodation. This programme provided a safe space for vulnerable women to rebuild their lives, often after instances of domestic abuse or family breakdown. They were able to do it with their children. Without this support, families are now facing eviction. The County Council is throwing many vulnerable constituents out of their accommodation and onto the Borough Council's housing register at last minute when they know that that register is overwhelmed and oversubscribed. That is morally indefensible. So I ask the Minister directly, will she condemn that decision by Surrey County Council, and will she raise it with the County Council to ensure that vulnerable families are not left without safe accommodation? More broadly, the reality that sleeping rough and homelessness are symptoms of a deeper structural failure in this country, and I've heard this from members today. Our country is broken, but it can be fixed, and we need the government to lead on that for us. I will.
The Honourable Gentleman came into the debate about half an hour in. Now, it's entirely up to the Honourable Member for Woking as to whether he should allow the intervention, but in general, do expect people to be in the debate far sooner than that. A few minutes late arrival is permissible, 30 minutes isn't.
Thank you, Dr. Wilson. I am happy to give way to my colleague from Dorset West. I believe he will be attending a bit earlier as a result of your comments. Thank you.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and I appreciate the steer from the chair, and my apologies for the late arrival. my honourable friend talks about the wider structural issues that are driving homelessness, one of which is a winner-takes-all system when it comes to benefits, where families that may be breaking up, may be splitting custody of children on a 50-50 basis, but the benefit awarding system only going to one parent results in another parent having no access to their children, whether they are and often resulting in them losing their home and ending up homeless. Does he agree with me that, as well as the councils and the NCLFG, we also want to look at how the benefit system ensures that parents can stay in accommodation and have access to their children?
I completely agree with my honourable friend. He makes a really valid point. This debate has quite rightly focused on housing, but it has wider impacts as well, and we need Department of Work and Pensions to change our benefit system to ensure that families are properly supported and we don't have children sleeping rough. I've obviously highlighted the particular case of Surrey County Council evicting families with children in my constituency. And I really worry that some of them may sleep rough. Across England, almost 5,000 people slept rough for one single night in autumn last year. That's a 20% increase on the previous year. We know the causes: chronic housing shortages, poverty, relationship breakdown, gaps in welfare support, and above all, the lack of social housing.
On that point, would the member give way?
I will.
I thank the honourable member for giving way. In the late 70s and the 80s, the government support for social housing benefit, about 80% plus went to the council. That money was reinvested in housing, repairs, but also the surplus was used in other services. Today, in real terms, then it was around 28 billion. Today it's about 30 billion. It's not changed. But the money going to councils is now 20%, and money going to private landlords is 80%. So 80% of 30 billion, whatever that is, 24 billion, is now going out of the system, and this was money going to councils. So does he agree with me that this, the right to buy and the ability for councils not to replenish stock has really adversely impacted not just housing, but wider public services, and we must allow councils to buy back homes or build new ones so that housing benefit goes into the council?
I completely agree with my honourable friend. We have privatised our housing welfare system. It has resulted in worse conditions and a higher cost to taxpayers. The Liberal Democrats have been campaigning on housing since before we were the Liberal Democrats. The great sort of architect of the welfare state and Liberal, William Beveridge, characterised the squalor of poor housing and homelessness in the early 20th century. And he said it was a giant that needed to be defeated. Yet we still haven't slayed that today. And it's heartbreaking to hear these stories this afternoon. But I particularly want to turn to some asks of the Minister. Please will the Minister ensure that sufficient financial resources for local authorities are available so that they can deliver the Homelessness Reduction Act and provide accommodation for survivors of domestic abuse? Will the government ring-fence emergency funding for local councils to ensure that they can deliver permanent accommodation for rough sleepers? Will they exempt groups of homeless people and those at risk of homeless people from the shared accommodation rule? The government has also removed the period from refugees for their move-on accommodation from 56 days to 28 days. When it was 56 days, rough sleeping notably reduced. It gave refugees that chance to set in motion leaving state support. But 28 days is not working. The government has only made an exemption for those who are pregnant, those who are over the age of 65, and those who have a disability. That's the only exemption. Now, I don't agree with changing the rule, but I'm not going to ask the Minister to defend that. What I'm asking her to do is to raise with the Home Office to ensure that families with children are exempt from that rule. In conclusion, Dr Milson, the government must address this awful system that is failing vulnerable children with their families. We cannot have children sleeping rough. The work of organisations like the York Road Project and my constituency of Woking show that where compassion and the community are involved shows what people can achieve. It's now the responsibility of the government to match that endeavour and ensure that children and families do not sleep rough. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr Mearson, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And can I firstly congratulate the Honourable Lady for Liverpool Wavertree for securing this debate. She's not just an Honourable Lady, but she's an honourable friend to me, and I'm delighted to be able to respond to her on behalf of the opposition, and I even managed to get out of bed just to do it because she was leading this debate this morning. She's right, absolutely right, in her opening remarks that we shouldn't be here this morning having to debate an issue like this. But while we do have to debate these issues, I'm pleased that she's on the case, and I look forward to working with her in one of her successors as Shadow Minister for Homelessness. And I know that she has the welfare of young people across this country, particularly those that have found themselves homeless, at the heart of what she does, and I congratulate her again for securing this debate this morning. Dr Mearson, rough sleeping among families with children represents one of the most visible and distressing signs of the housing crisis in our country. Behind every statistic is a child growing up without the security of a stable home, a family living with uncertainty, and communities struggling to cope with rising costs of living and other socio-economic pressures. We can all agree across this House this is not a matter to procrastinate or prevaricate on. In the 2024 Labour manifesto, the Labour Party promised to develop, and I quote, a new cross-government strategy to put Britain back on track to ending homelessness. That strategy was not published until the 11th of December 2025, much later than expected, and at the tail end of this parliamentary session. But I will say to the Minister, who I'm pleased to see here this morning, in a meeting that she kindly offered to on a cross-party basis, I assured her that the official opposition and I, as Shadow Minister, are committed to working on a cross-party basis to make sure that this strategy works. And my comments this morning do not demur from that approach. But there are some areas where I just want to make some comments on the strategy and slightly challenge as to where we think that it could go further. My main concern about the homelessness strategy going forward is that this seems to me to be an opportunity, and the Minister has grabbed the opportunity, but an opportunity where it seems to be an MHCLG-led solution that does miss out on a kind of fundamental rewiring of how government works in tackling homelessness. And I say that, as I said just now, in a constructive way, but I believe that it does lack genuine cross-party ministerial oversight. It does lack the cross-departmental approach that we need, particularly when we look at the fact that homelessness isn't just an issue that MHCLG needs to find a solution to. It involves the Department for Education, it involves the Department for Health, it involves the Home Office in the way in which the Honourable Lady for Liverpool Wavertree described. For example, when the Department for Health is involved, we need to get better at analysing the data of drug and alcohol discharges from hospital. I am not convinced that this strategy, despite its overall well intentions, really takes that cross-ministerial approach where it needs to go. And I would look to the Minister just to confirm to the Chamber this morning that she is chairing a cross-ministerial committee on this, and that she will continue to do that going forward, and how often that might meet when she winds up. The Honourable Lady for Liverpool Wavertree also mentioned the problem with data concerning immigration. She's absolutely right that the Home Office, I suspect, and agree with her on, has been slightly left off the hook on this strategy, and we look to the Minister to give us some reassurances on that as she stands up to wind up in the debate shortly. However, I do think that this strategy goes in the right direction, but there are some concerns about the lack of funding to really tackle some of the good intentions that the Minister's outlined over the last few months. For example, the strategy doesn't give funding to Housing First to make it really go on a national rollout. And the LGA says that the cross-department approach is needed, and it needs to be embedded at the heart of all government departments within their constitutions, and we would ask that that is considered. Lastly, on the housing strategy itself, Prevention models are still patchy across the whole of the UK, and an emphasis is needed on national outcomes to stop people falling into that crisis. And charities like the Bread and Butter thing across the whole of the United Kingdom are really helping to work with this and relieve crisis on an emergency scale, and we congratulate them on what they're doing. Yes, I will give way to Honourable Gentleman.
Minister, for giving way. The Right to Buy scheme, and I'm not going into the pros and cons of that scheme, led to councils losing big chunks of their stock to people who bought their houses at a discount. I know the scheme has been changed and the discount has been reduced. However, I'm not aware of where the money will go even today. Would he agree with me that the decision for the then government and subsequent governments to take the proceeds of sales instead of leaving them with councils to replenish the stock was a mistake? And is that something that the government should be looking at now doing for any further sales?
I thank you, Honourable Gentleman. Then he asked a perfectly reasonable question. That was a policy decision of governments before I took this role. But yes, I do think in hindsight, although I believe in the right to buy policy, I think it was a massive tool to allow people to achieve ownership in a radical way that we need to see again in this country. I do accept that actually some of the way the system worked, we did need to see greater investment back into council so that it could reinvest in stock. I think that is a perfectly reasonable thing to assume. But I would say that under this government, the social housing fund that has been allocated just isn't great enough to ensure that we have the houses that we need to deliver going forward. Dr Murison, the number of people sleeping rough in England is now at its highest level since records began in 2010. Figures from autumn 2025 estimate that 4,793 people were sleeping on the streets on a single night, an increase on the previous year. And particularly concerning is the rise in vulnerable groups on the streets. The number of female rough sleepers increased by 8% to 733, alongside 3,938 men and 122 cases where gender was not recorded. London continues to face the greatest challenge, with 1,277 people sleeping rough, the highest figure in the country. But the sharpest increase was in the northeast of England, where rough sleeping rose by 31% in just 1 year. For many families, the pathway to rough sleeping begins long before anyone ends up on the streets. It often starts in temporary accommodation. And between July and September 2025, 134,760 households were living in hotels, B&Bs or temporary flats, an increase of nearly 7% compared with the previous year. Of those households, 85,730 include children. These are the highest figures since records began in 2010. In London, the situation is particularly stark. According to London councils, 1 in 50 Londoners is now homeless, and record numbers of children are growing up in temporary accommodation. In some boroughs, the pressures are especially severe. Newham has 6,667 households in temporary accommodation, followed by Lambeth with 4,657, and Southwark with 3,828. And across England, statutory homelessness data shows 169,050 children are currently homeless in temporary accommodation. That represents a 12% increase in just 1 year and the 9th consecutive record since December 2022. Ultimately, Dr Murison, the only sustainable solution to homelessness is increasing the supply of homes, especially social and affordable housing. And the government has pledged to build 1.5 million homes during this Parliament. However, I say it again, experts have expressed serious doubts about whether that target can be achieved. Professor Paul Cheshire, a leading planning expert who has advised previous governments, has stated, and I quote, that there is absolutely no way the current reforms will deliver that number of homes. And let me be very clear to members across the House, that does include social homes and should include social homes. But recent housing statistics raise similar concerns. According to official figures, 208,600 net new dwellings were added in Labour's first year in office, a 6% drop on the previous year. Just 190,600 new homes were built, down by 8,000 compared with the final year of the previous government. If this rate continues, fewer than 1 million homes will be delivered by 2029, well short of the government's stated target. This is a serious issue because housing supply directly affects homelessness. Without sufficient homes, more families are pushed into temporary accommodation and the risk of rough sleeping continues. The scale of the challenge facing families with children demands urgency, coordination and long-term solutions. That means tackling child poverty, expanding affordable housing, supporting local authorities and ensuring that strategies are delivered on time and backed by meaningful action. Because we all in this House, across all sides, agree that no child should grow up without the stability of a safe home. No family should face the prospect of homelessness, and no society should accept rising rough sleeping as inevitable. Dr Murison, I say once again to the Minister, we come here in the spirit of cooperation. I genuinely believe that this Minister wants to achieve her aim of reducing homelessness. She's entered into the right direction to make sure that the Department has constituted this to deliver this. We just look to see how this will be carried on across all government departments to achieve what we all want to achieve. Thank you very much.
Minister. Thank you, Dr Murison. And I'd like to begin by thanking the Honourable Member for Liverpool Wavertree for securing this debate. She's been dedicated to tackling homelessness for many years, including her work as the co-chair of the all-party parliamentary group on ending homelessness. Rough sleeping and homelessness is an issue that scarred our city region for many years, and I know everybody at home is very proud of her and the work that she does. As many members from a number of parties have mentioned, we don't want to be here. We don't want to be here talking about this morning, but this is so serious as an issue, Dr Murison. We must be here talking about this morning. And like all members here today, I was extremely concerned about recent reports of families of children sleeping rough. And I just want to begin, Dr Murison, by being absolutely clear about this and putting on the record that there ought to be no ambiguity. This should never, ever happen. And let me say, for clarity, a household with a child has priority need for the purposes of the Housing Act 1996. This means that if a household with a child is homeless and is eligible for homelessness assistance, the household must be provided with temporary accommodation until suitable, settled accommodation is secured. Where households do not meet the criteria for homelessness assistance, local authorities have a duty under the Children Act 1989 to safeguard and promote the welfare of children who are in need, including providing them with accommodation where necessary. And let me say, for absolute clarity, this applies irrespective of the child's immigration status. The law is absolutely clear. I'll just finish for clarity. The law is absolutely clear that where a local authority believes a household does not have a local connection to their district, they remain under a duty to accommodate until a referral to another district has been accepted, and it is only when a referral has been accepted that the receiving authority must fulfil any duties to accommodate. There should never be any reason for families to be refused accommodation whilst there is a dispute about which authority owes that household a duty. There is no grey area here. Families with children should never be left without accommodation.
Everyone, thank her for that. There was one example I didn't get a chance to mention in my previous speech, and that was in Northern Ireland, where a woman, a mother and two children who were sleeping rough in the square. The reason why they couldn't get temporary accommodation was because the housing society at that time had none. But what they did was that they, because of their duty of care, as the Minister's outlined, was they made accommodation available in one of the local hotels until such times as temporary accommodation came available. Is that something that the Minister would advocate as well?
Dr Murison, I'm not quite sure I caught all of the details of the case that the member raised there, but if he would send me the details, I will happily respond to him. He'll know that we don't want to see children in B&B accommodation, and that's one of the main planks of our strategy, which I'll come to later. But if he wants to provide me with details, I'll happily have a look at it. I wrote, as has been mentioned, to local authority leaders and chief executives last month, reminding them of that and asking that they take personal responsibility for making sure that no child in their area is ever left to sleep on a street, in a car or any other location not designed for living in. And I'm conscious of the case raised by the member for Dewsbury and Batley, and I'm sure that he has made every effort to sort that out with Kirklees. But if he has further problems or Kirklees has specific issues that they want to raise with me, I trust that he will write to me directly. I know that we must support councils to meet their obligations, and my department has been in contact with the councils mentioned in the report to understand how this was able to happen and to make sure that it won't be happening again. More broadly, members will be aware that we recently completed the finance settlement for the next 3 years for local authority, reconnecting council funding with deprivation. Obviously, that should aid councils that are more likely to deal with these issues in their objectives to do so. The government is providing over £2.4 billion this spending review period in support of the Families First Partnership Programme, which is introducing reforms to children's social care aimed at ensuring children and families can access timely support to get ahead of this problem, as many members have suggested. And local authorities should use this ring-fence funding to support meeting their duties under the Children Act. And it's been great to speak to many members and their local authority leaders about how they're going to do that. We're providing record levels of investment in homelessness and rough sleeping, which includes over £3.6 billion of investment over 3 years from 26, 27 to 28, 29. This is a funding boost of over £1 billion compared to commitments by the previous government, and I pay tribute to the Chancellor for taking that decision. It's right that we're investing that much because we inherited a homelessness crisis, and members have set out just how bad things have got. Our long-term vision is to end homelessness and rough sleeping and make sure that everyone has access to a safe and decent home. These statistics show that we've heard about today that for far too many people that's not yet the case, and that's why we published our national plan to end homelessness last December, to shift the system from crisis response to prevention and get back on track to ending homelessness. Now, our plan is backed by clear national targets to increase the proportion of households who are supported to stay in their own home and help find alternative accommodation when they approach their local council for support. That's the prevention goal, and I think that should underpin everything that we do for reasons that have been mentioned, not least the experience shared by the member for Doncaster East. We must prevent first, because homelessness is too big of a trauma. Nobody should experience it. We want to eliminate the use of B&B accommodation for families by the end of this Parliament, except in absolute dire emergencies, and to halve long-term rough sleeping by the end of this Parliament. Of course, we want everyone to have a roof over their head, but some of the problems that we're facing and seeing the experience of rough sleepers go deep, and we have to go to those toughest of problems. Our plan is backed by £3.6 billion worth of funding, as I've said, including £2.2 billion, which councils are free to use to design effective, locally tailored services to deliver better outcomes and reduce reliance on emergency interventions. And a number of members asked about ring fencing, and I would just say that there is a tension between allowing local innovation, for which ring fences are unhelpful, and putting clear ring fences around funds to make sure that we're able to see all councils tackle homelessness. But it's got to be a balance, and that's the way we've taken the decisions over funding. Our plan sets out how we will tackle the root causes of homelessness by building 1.5 million new homes, including more social and affordable housing that has been built for years. We're also lifting 550,000 children out of poverty through the measures in our child poverty strategy, including by lifting the 2-child limit. Public institutions should lead the way in preventing homelessness, and our plan sets a long-term ambition that no one should leave a public institution into homelessness, with cross-government targets to start that change and to reduce homelessness from prisons, care and hospitals. And a number of members, including the Shadow Minister, were kind enough to say that they believed in my will to get this done, but were sceptical about other government departments. Well, I hope that I can reassure all members here that they don't need to be sceptical, because I think that my experience working with ministers across other departments has been positive. I was just going to respond to the Shadow Minister and to say that the interministerial group is about to meet quite soon. We've been preparing for that. The expert group, our expert group of advisors, met with me yesterday. and we got a great deal of things done and discussed, and I'll come on to some of those, but just to reassure members that we have active participation in that interministerial group and across government.
I thank the Minister for giving way, and I know that I knew she would answer me with a straight answer. Can I just push her a bit further on the remit of that interministerial group? Can she confirm to the Chamber this morning her intention on how often that should meet, and whether it is constituted to meet at a certain number of times during the year?
Thank you, Dr Morrison, and I thank the Shadow Minister. The interministerial group will meet regularly. There are interconnections between homelessness and the violence against women and girls strategy, because the third biggest cause of homelessness is people fleeing domestic abuse. So some of the work that we need to do, we will do via our work as ministers through the violence against women and girls strategy. There is clearly a connection, as a number of members have highlighted, between homelessness and poverty. And we are about to take forward the delivery of the child poverty strategy. So some of the aspects that we're considering will be taken forward through that discussion amongst ministers. And I'm very conscious that we're not having meetings for the sake of it. We have meetings to get things done. So it will be the interconnection of those three strategies that we will, through which we'll deliver on objectives, and ministers will certainly meet regularly. I certainly will.
I thank the Minister for giving way and for the contribution that she's making. Will the Minister commit to publishing the minutes of the interministerial group?
Thank you, Dr Morrison. I was going to come on and respond to the member's question, in that I'll certainly commit to providing an update. It's beyond my procedural knowledge to know exactly what we're allowed to publish from ministerial groups, but I will certainly commit to publishing an update, and I was going to suggest that perhaps we might have a meeting of the APPG shortly after, and then we can provide an in-person update, because I think it would be far better for parliamentarians to be engaged as we go through this process. I'll just do a quick run round other government departments, so that because there's a number of areas that I want to update in response to questions that people have asked. The Treasury are leading on the value for money review of homelessness support, which should pick up the precise points that the member for Dewsbury and Batley made on the cost of temporary accommodation. We've talked about the disaster that this is for families today. It's a disaster for taxpayers, what's going on at the moment. So the Treasury are working with ourselves and DWP on that, and very actively engaged. Turning to the Department for Work and Pensions, I'm working extremely closely with them on incomes and on the homelessness system overall, and they've been very active. With regards to the Home Office, the Minister for Prisons and I have been working very closely on people leaving prisons. He's got exacting targets on trying to reduce the number of people who leave prison to no fixed abode. And I've worked very closely with other Home Office ministers. I will make sure that Home Office ministers receive a copy of this debate, because I'm sure members would want their opinions to be heard by them. On health, we need to make sure that neighbourhood health services support people who've experienced rough sleeping, particularly in relation to addiction and the trauma that children who've experienced homelessness might go through. And on education, members will know the absolute disaster it is when children have to move schools because of temporary accommodation. So the Department for Education have been working closely with us on that. I hope that reassures members that this is a cross-government effort, but nonetheless we will introduce a legal duty to collaborate, to compel public services to work together to prevent homelessness in any case. Building more homes, as the Shadow Minister pointed out, does take time, but our plan takes immediate action to tackle the worst forms of homelessness now. And alongside the work that the Minister for Housing is doing to bring forward much more social housing than we've seen in this country for a heck of a long time, we will increase the emergency accommodation reduction pilots into a programme backed by £30 million worth of funding to tackle a wider range of core practice, including B&B and unsuitable out-of-area placements. And as I mentioned, our expert group met with me yesterday, and we intend to move very quickly on the toolkits that we need. As much of the information exists already, we just need to get on and do it. We're helping more vulnerable people off the streets and into stable housing with £150 million into supported housing services, while investing £15 million in our long-term rough sleeping innovation programme to help councils with the greatest pressures to deliver more personalised and comprehensive support for people with complicated needs. And I could talk about that for a long time, but I won't. But members here will know and understand that sometimes what sits behind homelessness can be complicated personal circumstances, and we need really skilled caseworkers to support people with that. Likewise, with the work on allocations, we want to get on with it. That work is underway, and I am making sure that it moves quickly. Now, in relation to our new targets, the latest data showed progress against 2 of our new targets. The percentage of duties owed where homelessness was prevented or relieved with accommodation secured for 6 or more months is up 3.7 percentage points year on year to 46%. That means that the proportion of households at risk of homelessness or already homeless were helped to secure accommodation than over the same period, more of them over the same period than the year before. And this includes increases in households helped to find accommodation before experiencing the traumatic experience of homelessness. And that's the target I really want to see go up. This quarter also shows a reduction in the number of families in B&B accommodation over 6 weeks. 1,670 families is still far too many, and that is over 6 weeks. So, to be clear, that is over the statutory limit. But that number is the lowest since the beginning of 2023 and down 55% year on year. So I'm confident we're going in the right direction on B&B use, but we need to go faster and do more. These figures do not mean that the job is done, far from it, but they show that prevention is improving and fewer families are spending long periods in unsuitable accommodation. And I have confidence that we can achieve the targets that we've set ourselves, but we do need to make sure that we maintain focus and, as members have suggested, keep working right across government to deliver. I want to finish by thanking the member for Liverpool Wavertree for securing this debate. As I've said, our city is very proud of her. I hope that we will never have cause to discuss families with children sleeping rough again, but I trust that members here will bring forward other debates so that we can keep our focus on our homelessness strategy and make progress, as I've suggested, over the years to come.
Thank you, Dr. Wilson. And can I thank all honourable members who have contributed today? I think their contributions have been thoughtful and knowledgeable. I'd also like to thank the opposition spokesperson and the Lib Dem spokesperson for their contributions, and to the Minister as well for her contributions, and I look forward to working with her constructively in the months and years ahead. I'd like to place on thanks my record to Crisis for their incredible work, and in particular Dan Hewitt and ITV for keeping this all in the public domain. The work they do is absolutely incredible, and I hope that collectively we can all use the moral clarity that we have found today in these abhorrent cases to spur us on to build a better Britain where nobody experiences homelessness. Thank you.
The question is if this House has considered the matter of rough sleeping among families with children. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order. The next debate having been withdrawn, the sitting is suspended until 2:30 p.m.